It is incredibly easy to disappear in the deep forest along the Appalachian Trail, but the real terror is not getting lost in these mountains. It's realizing you're already the target, a stalker taking pictures of you in the dark, a stranger tracking how scared you are, and local men waiting to claim your blood. This is living with shadows. My name is Daniel. I'm 35, working in IT consulting out of Nashville, Tennessee. I've hiked sections of the Appalachian Trail for 6 years. Solo trips, 4 or 5 days at a time. I know how to read a trail, and I thought I knew how to read the people on it. I was 3 days into a 5-day section through the Cherokee National Forest last October when I found the flyer. It was stapled to a hemlock tree at eye level just off the white blaze. Standard missing persons format, a black and white photo, a name, a date, and the county sheriff's department contact number. I see them occasionally. Usually I glance and keep moving. This one stopped me. It wasn't the subject. It was the background of the photograph. Behind the missing hiker, maybe 30 yards back, was a rock formation I recognized immediately. 3 massive boulders stacked at an angle, with one flat slab overhanging the other 2 like a shelf. I had passed that exact formation 20 minutes ago. This photo had been taken on this exact stretch of trail. I looked closer at the text. Male, 29. Aaron Saltz, disappeared 8 months ago. Solo hiker, last seen on this section. Then my eyes drifted to the background figure in the distance. It was blurred. Walking away from the camera, a gray technical jacket, a green pack, a very specific green pack, the exact same model, brand, and color as the one currently resting on my shoulders. I told myself it was a coincidence. Same popular gear, different person. I kept hiking. I reached that night's trail shelter around 4 p.m. 2 other hikers were already inside, a couple in their late 40s, Gary and Pat, section hikers from Ohio. They were friendly, already cooking dinner on the shelter floor. I hung my pack on the post outside, introduced myself, and sat on the lower wooden bunk. After 10 minutes of quiet, the unease got the better of me. I pulled out my phone and zoomed into the picture I had taken of the flyer. My breath caught. The jacket in the background was mine. The pack was mine. But there was one undeniable detail. On the left shoulder strap of the pack in the photo was a distinct strip of silver duct tape over a jagged tear, a repair I had personally made 10 months ago after my strap caught on a root. This photo was taken 8 months ago when Aaron Saltz disappeared, but I hadn't been on this section of the trail since my trip 10 months ago. Whoever took that photo of Aaron Saltz had captured me in the background 2 months prior. Someone had been archiving photos of this trail for nearly a year. I was still staring at my phone when Pat spoke from the shelter entrance. Her voice was barely a whisper. She said there was someone standing in the tree line behind the shelter. I walked to the entrance and looked. The tree line was maybe 40 feet back, dense, choked with mountain laurel, and dark even in the late afternoon light. She pointed to a specific gap between 2 trees. The shape was there, upright, perfectly still. It wasn't a hiker pausing briefly. It was the rigid, unblinking posture of a person standing with absolute intention, just watching the shelter. Gary called out into the woods, "Hey, you coming in?" The figure didn't move. It didn't respond. The light was dropping fast, turning the woods into heavy shadows, so we went back inside and barred the door. I showed Gary and Pat the flyer. I showed them the zoomed-in photo of my pack. I explained the timeline. Gary looked at the photo, then looked through the shelter mesh at the dark woods. "We're packing out," he said flatly. "There's a trailhead 4 miles ahead. We have headlamps. We're leaving now." We scrambled to pull our gear from the bunks, consolidating our packs in a frantic rush. Then, heavy boots hit the wooden shelter steps outside. Slow, deliberate. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, then silence. Whoever it was standing right outside the entrance door. None of us moved or breathed for 10 full seconds. Gary, gripping a heavy camp hatchet, pulled the door open. The clearing was completely empty. The steps were bare. The fading light showed nothing but the wind moving through the grass. But when Gary turned back inside, he froze. At the far end of the shelter on the bunk directly below mine, a sleeping bag had been laid out. Unrolled, neat, positioned exactly the way a hiker sets up for a night's sleep. The three of us had been standing together in the center of the room the entire time. No one had come through the front door. No one had walked past us, but while our backs were turned, someone had silently slipped through the rear window opening, unrolled that bag on the bunk, and left. We fled. No discussion. Packs on, headlamps activated, moving at a brutal pace down the dark trail. The forest was pitch black within 20 minutes, our headlamps cutting thin white tunnels through the dense trees. The three of us stayed tight together, matching footsteps, no gaps. Suddenly, Gary tripped over a thick root, his headlamp swinging wildly into the brush. In the brief arc of his light, 20 yards ahead on the trail, a figure was standing completely still, facing us. We stopped dead. Gary grabbed my arm. I focused my beam directly onto the figure's chest. It was a man. He wore a dark blue technical jacket with a specific circular logo on the left pocket, the exact brand and model Aaron Saltz wore in his missing persons photo. He stood with his arms dead at his sides, his head tilted slightly downward, completely unbothered by the high lumen light hitting his face. It wasn't a ghost. It was a man wearing a dead hiker's clothes. Pat let out a sharp, terrified sob. We didn't wait. We sprinted around the figure, crashing through the brush, running blindly on the uneven rocky trail for the remaining 3 miles. I didn't look back. I just listened to the terrifying sound of heavy footsteps running parallel to us through the dark woods, keeping pace just out of sight. We hit the trailhead parking lot at a full sprint. Gary and Pat's SUV was parked near the center. My car was 30 yards away. We threw our gear into my vehicle, locked the doors, and I floored the accelerator, spraying gravel as we tore onto the state highway. We reached the forest ranger station at Unicoi just before 9 p.m. The ranger on duty pulled Aaron Saltz's active case file the moment I mentioned the name. He listened to everything, the flyer, the duct tape, the shelter, the figure on the trail. He didn't look surprised. He looked exhausted. The ranger opened the file on the desk between us and laid out 3 photos. They were crime scene photographs of Aaron Saltz's recovered gear found in a neat pile near a different trailhead months ago. His tent, his cookware, his clothes. The ranger pointed to the jacket in the crime scene photo. It was the dark blue jacket with the circular logo. "We found his gear," the ranger said quietly, "but we never found the body. And we've had 3 separate reports this season of a man wearing that exact jacket, tracking solo hikers between the shelters. Whoever is doing this is hunting." I drove home to Nashville that night. I didn't stop once. 3 weeks later, the adrenaline had faded, and I was finally cleaning out my hiking pack in the garage. I was running my hands through the small pockets, clearing out old wrappers and spare batteries. In the very bottom of my hip belt pocket, folded twice, was a piece of paper. It was a photograph, printed on standard glossy photo paper. The image had been taken at dusk, looking into a trail shelter from the outside through the wire mesh. Inside the shelter, lit by a dim headlamp, a man was sitting on a lower bunk with his boots off, staring at his phone. It was me. From day 2 of the trip, sitting in the second shelter, completely alone, completely unaware. The photo had been taken from less than 5 feet away. Whoever took it had been standing right outside the mesh in the dark, watching me breathe while I thought I was entirely safe. Aaron Saltz didn't disappear because he got lost. He disappeared because someone was building a portfolio on him, and now they've started mine. I burned the photograph. I sold the pack. I am never going back into those woods. Because I know that somewhere in the Cherokee National Forest, a man is sitting in the dark, holding a camera, waiting for me to return to the frame. I was 4 days into a solo hike through the Smokies. Late October, the air had that sharp cold that burns your throat, and I hadn't seen another soul in 48 hours when the Russell Field shelter finally came into view around 5 p.m. It was a standard 3-walled wooden box with a tin roof and a stone fire ring out front. I dropped my pack on the nearest sleeping platform and checked my phone. No service, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the notebook sitting on the log next to the dead fire pit. It was a small black moleskin. The cover had no title. I opened it. The first page was blank except for a single digit written in blue ink. The number 7, I flipped the page. 6, I flipped again. 8. Every single page was filled with random digits from 1 to 10. No names, no dates, just a meticulous log of numbers. That was when I heard the footsteps. A man walked into the clearing. He was tall, thin, wearing a bright red shirt and shorts that looked 20 years old. His beard was patchy and his eyes were too wide. He carried a full thru-hiker rig, 60-liter pack, trekking poles, a bear canister strapped to the top. He smiled when he saw me. His teeth were small and yellow. He said his name was Donovan. I said nothing. He sat down on the log right next to the notebook. He did not ask if the shelter was taken. He did not introduce himself further. He just sat there, staring into the cold fire pit. And then he picked up the notebook. He flipped through it slowly, page by page, and I watched his face. No expression. None. His lips did not move. His eyes did not blink. He closed the notebook and looked directly at me. "How scared are you right now?" he asked. I said I was fine. He smiled again. "On a scale of 1 to 10, he said. 1 means not scared at all. 10 means you're about to run. Where are you?" The woods were dead silent. A branch snapped somewhere in the dark trees behind me. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. He hadn't asked my name. He hadn't asked where I was heading. He had asked me to rate my own fear. I said 2. He tilted his head. 2, he repeated. Then he pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote something in the notebook. Not a number, a word. I could not read it from where I stood. He closed the cover, tucked the notebook into his jacket, and stood up. 2 is generous, he whispered. Most people start higher. I should have packed up and left right then, but it was getting dark and the temperature was dropping fast. The next shelter was 9 miles away over jagged terrain. So I stayed. I told myself he was just weird. The trail does that to people. I set up my sleeping bag on the farthest platform from the dirt floor. He stayed down on the log. He did not set up a tent. He did not unpack his bag. He just sat there in the pitch black with his headlamp off. Facing me, I could see his silhouette against the dim gray twilight. He was not moving, not fidgeting, not eating, just sitting, staring. I asked if he was going to sleep. He said nothing. I asked again, louder. He tilted his head. That same slow tilt like a dog hearing a strange noise. Then he spoke. "I'm watching your number change," he said. "It went up to 4 about 2 minutes ago." My stomach tightened. I had not moved. I had not said a word. How could he know what I was feeling? I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around my shoulders and turned my back to him. That was a fatal mistake, because when you turn your back on something in the woods, you lose the only warning system you have. The first hour passed in absolute silence. Then I heard the scratching. It was soft at first, like fingernails on dry wood. Coming from the wall directly behind my head, I sat up fast and shone my headlamp. Nothing. The scratching stopped. I lay back down. It started again. I sat up. It stopped. Every time I moved, the sound matched me perfectly. I swept my light across the shelter floor. He was not on the log anymore. The fire ring was empty. The log was bare, but his heavy pack was still there, leaning against the wood. No thru-hiker leaves their pack behind. That meant he was still here, somewhere, in the dark, watching. Then I heard the whisper. It came from directly behind my left ear, so close I felt warm breath hit my neck. 6, he said, just that number. 1 word. I screamed and spun around with my knife out. Nobody was there. The shelter was 3 walls and a roof. There was nowhere to hide, but I had felt his breath. I had heard his voice. I scrambled out of my bag and backed into the farthest corner, my knife pointed at the empty air. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The whisper came again from the opposite corner of the shelter this time. 7. He was moving faster than my eyes could track, not walking, not running, just appearing. His voice came from the trees, then from the roof, then from inside my own pack. I slapped my hands over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. That was when I felt something cold touch my ankle, a single finger tracing a slow circle around my bone. I opened my eyes. He was crouched at my feet. His face was 3 inches from mine. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and his mouth was stretched into a massive smile that did not reach his pupils. He held the notebook open to a fresh page. On it, he had drawn a crude graph. The x-axis was time. The y-axis was numbers from 1 to 10. He had been tracking my panic, plotting it, for hours. 8, he whispered. You're almost there. Pure cold certainty hit me. I knew I was going to die. His hand reached for my ankle again. I did the only thing my body would let me do. I kicked. My heavy boot caught him squarely in the chest, and he fell backward onto the dirt floor. He did not yell, he did not gasp. He just stared at me from the ground with that same blank smile. I grabbed my pack and ran. The trail was pitch black. No moon, no stars. My headlamp cut a weak, flickering cone through the fog, but I didn't care where I was going. I just ran. Branches whipped my face. Roots grabbed my feet. I fell twice and got up both times. Behind me, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no breathing. That was worse than hearing him. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook from exhaustion. I finally stopped at a rocky outcrop and doubled over, gasping for air. I listened. Nothing. Just the wind through the pines. I thought I had lost him. Then I looked down at my pack. The small black notebook was tucked into the side mesh pocket. I had not put it there. I had never touched it. But there it was. I pulled it out with shaking hands and opened it under the beam of my light. The pages were no longer just numbers. He had written sentences in that cold blue ink. You survived the night, the first page read. I flipped the page. But I know your route. Next page, I know your car. Next page, I know your license plate. Next page, I will see you at the next shelter. Page after page. The same handwriting, a continuous list of promises. I dropped the notebook like it was on fire. It landed in the wet leaves, flipping open to the final page. There was a fresh entry dated for tonight. My name was scrawled at the top. Next to it, a final rating, 9 out of 10. And underneath it, in heavy, aggressive black ink, he had written 2 words. Finish. Later. I ran again. I didn't stop until I broke through the tree line at the Davenport Gap Ranger Station at 6 a.m. The Rangers searched the trail. The sheriff deployed tracking dogs. They found the shelter completely empty, no 60-liter pack, no notebook, no footprints in the mud. They never caught him. He vanished back into the unmonitored veins of the mountains. I still hike the Appalachian Trail every autumn. The woods call you back. But I never hike alone anymore, and I never look at notebooks left in the shelters. Because I know he's still out there, checking his maps, and waiting to see if my number finally hits a 10. My cousin Hannah and I hiked a 17-mile loop near the abandoned mining town of Lignite, Virginia, every October. It was old coal country, a landscape of deep valleys where the trees grow so thick they blot out the sky and the ground stays permanently soft from the mountain rains. 10 years ago, when she was 12 and I was 15, we almost died on this same stretch of woods. We never talked about what happened back then. We just walked. By noon, we reached a high ridge and broke into a small clearing. That was where we found the oak. It was a massive, ancient tree growing completely alone. Its trunk was covered in nails, hundreds of them, rusted and bent, hammered deep into the wood. Strung between the rusted metal spikes were scraps of yellowed paper, faded, torn, rotting into the bark. I stepped closer to read one of the pages. It was handwritten scripture, Psalm 23. But the text was wrong. Instead of the valley of the shadow of death, the ink read, the valley of the witness. Hannah grabbed my arm. Her grip was so tight I felt her fingernails pierce through my heavy canvas jacket. She pointed at the very base of the roots. There was a small wooden sign nailed to the dirt. Hand-painted in thick, dark red paint were 4 words. I watched you park. I spun around. The ridge was empty, just gray fog, dead trees, and the wind moving through the mountain laurel. But my car was parked 2 miles back at the isolated trailhead. Whoever wrote that sign had tracked us from the highway, followed our footprints up the switchbacks, and was waiting. Before I could pull her back, Hannah stepped toward the tree. Her face was completely pale, her eyes empty, moving like a sleepwalker. She looked straight up into the dense canopy. High above us, tied to a low branch with thick fishing line, was a single Polaroid photograph fluttering in the wind. I didn't want to climb it. Every survival instinct told me to turn around and run back to the vehicle, but Hannah was already moving. She grabbed the lowest limb, her boots slipping on the wet wood, her arms scraping against the bark as she climbed blindly into the branches. I followed, because leaving her alone up there in that silence felt infinitely worse. Hannah reached the branch, ripped the Polaroid free, and held it out. My blood ran cold. The image showed a muddy creek bank from 10 years ago. A group of people stood in a circle, wearing long, dirt-stained white robes. In the center, a young girl was being held underwater by 2 men. I recognized the bathing suit instantly. It was bright yellow with pink flowers, Hannah's suit from that summer. This photograph proved she had been intentionally drowned, and I had interrupted them when I stumbled into the clearing 10 years ago. On the back of the photo, printed in the same dark red paint as the sign below, were 7 words. You were not supposed to leave the water. A sharp metallic snap echoed from the brush below us. I looked down through the branches. 3 men had stepped out from the thick mountain laurel into the clearing. They didn't wear masks or robes. They wore standard flannel shirts and muddy boots, but their faces were completely hollow, exhausted, grim, and unblinking. One of them carried a heavy rusted iron hammer. They didn't look up at us. They stood at the base of the tree, perfectly still, listening to the wind. Then the oldest man stepped forward, raised his hammer, and struck a fresh nail directly into the trunk. Bang! 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 The metallic echo shattered the silence of the valley. "Hannah," the old man called out. His voice was flat, tired, completely devoid of emotion. "The ledger is incomplete. Come down." Panic seized my chest. I grabbed Hannah by the jacket, but she was staring down at them, completely frozen in terror. The men didn't try to climb after us. They didn't shout. They simply began to pace in a slow, rhythmic circle around the base of the trunk, their heavy boots crunching perfectly in unison against the dead leaves. Crunch. 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 It sounded exactly like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. 10 years, the man with the hammer murmured, his voice tracking up through the branches. "We've kept the clearing clean for 10 years. We knew the mountains would bring you back." They were a generational cult, a hidden faction of the deep hollows that the local authorities always whispered about but could never prove. And they had been monitoring this loop trail, waiting for our return. Suddenly, the heavy roar of a logging truck rattled through the valley. Headlights flashed through the thick fog from the gravel forest road half a mile away. The 3 men stopped their circle. The old man looked toward the sound of the truck, then raised his eyes to the branches, locking his gaze directly onto mine. He didn't look angry. He just smiled, made my stomach turn. "We know your license plate, boy," he whispered. Without another word, the 3 men turned and melted backward into the dense mountain laurel, vanishing into the brush as silently as they had appeared. I scrambled down the tree, dragging Hannah with me. We ran the 2 miles back to the car in a blind panic, checking over our shoulders every 10 seconds, expecting a hand to reach out from the dark trees. We drove straight to the county sheriff's office. 2 deputies drove back up to the clearing that evening. They found the dead oak. They found the hundreds of nails. But the Polaroid was gone. The red sign was gone. And the ground had been meticulously swept with pine branches to erase every single footprint. The sheriff told us to leave the county and never come back. He wouldn't give us a file. He wouldn't take a formal statement. He just wanted us gone. Hannah moved to Arizona 3 months later, to the desert, where there are no trees. But last week, I was cleaning out my childhood bedroom and found an old family photo album from that specific summer. I flipped to the very last page, to a picture I had never seen before. It showed the same dead oak near lignite, the same nails, the same scraps of paper, but the photo was dated 40 years ago. decades before Hannah or I were ever born, and standing at the base of the tree smiling at the camera was a little girl we didn't know, wearing that exact same bright yellow bathing suit with pink flowers. Every autumn, when the wind blows hard from the east, I lock every window in my house. Because I don't just hear the wind, I hear a faint rhythmic sound coming from the dark woods outside my property line. Bang. 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 The sound of iron hitting metal. They aren't waiting for Hannah to return to the loop anymore. They found out where I live, and they are finishing the ledger.